A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
The online exploitation of children and minors is a real and present danger today, and every family on some level does their best to shield and protect their young from it. So it's comforting to know that certain groups and organisations are actively involved in this struggle to protect our most loved and vulnerable. And one such group has just launched a national advocacy campaign calling on Australians, and in particular Australian Christians, to advocate for stronger national online safety laws to protect children and young people. And the CEO of International Justice Mission joins us today to discuss the challenges and triumphs that they are experiencing. And a content warning: we are discussing online sexual exploitation of children. This can be a confronting topic and also not appropriate for some listeners. So David Braga, the CEO of International Justice Mission, joins us on 2020 today. David, welcome.
Thanks, Andrew. I really appreciate you having me on the show. Thank you.
It's good to have you, David. And many of our listeners would not have heard of the International Justice Mission. So who is IJM?
Yeah, thanks. So IJM is an international not-for-profit organisation that works to strengthen justice systems for vulnerable people around the world. So when you think about that, what's a justice system? A justice system is simply the combination of law enforcement, the court and judicial process, and the aftercare and support for victims of crime. We're so lucky in Australia, right? One of our many blessings is a professional, well-functioning justice system. So I don't know about you, but I've had to call the police before on 000, and when I called, it was just for a brick that had been put through the window of the car. But in 15 minutes, there were like 3 police cars combing the neighbourhood looking for this guy. They never caught him, but I did get my CDs back that he'd stolen from the centre of the console. And I would have had confidence that if we had caught him, there would have been a prosecution, maybe a conviction, an appropriate sentence. That's what justice is. But that's a dream for so many people around the world. So the work we do is to take particular jurisdictions and particular crime types and say, how do we change that location so that perpetrators will be prosecuted, given the right sentence and convicted, other criminals will be deterred from that crime, they won't want to go to jail, and that crime type will diminish. And so that local population will be protected from that form of violence. So our goal isn't perfection. You know, we don't have perfection where we live, but a standard that we would recognise and accept, and then have the local people being able to run that ecosystem by themselves without our help. And we've already done this in 9 different jurisdictions around the world, where we've been able to reduce crime types by like between 75 and 85%, always measured by another third party like a university research group. So we're confident that when we do our work, we can get significant and meaningful protection from harm for vulnerable people.
Yeah, I did read some of the stats. So in the Dominican Republic, sex trafficking was reduced by 78% thanks to the work of IGM. That's a massive outcome, isn't it?
Yeah, we're really pleased to have outcomes like that. And it just comes down to chipping away all the time at what's the next problem that exists in that location. How do we get a good justice outcome for the people there? And so the sort of work we do is with investigators, with lawyers, with aftercare specialists like psychologists and social workers. And then we work with the individual people. We're finding the people who are currently not getting justice and say what was missing for them and how do we fix that and fix it for everyone. And as you just keep putting down one more layer of bricks on your wall, you end up getting this outcome, like you said, that's just so amazing.
And that's only one of many outcomes, but this is a major logistical challenge, David. Are you only in Australia, or have you also got an American arm and a European arm? How does it work?
Yeah, so we're actually US headquartered out of Washington. So there are 1,400 people around the world in 35 different countries. So we've got countries that we're acting in, like the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia, just in our region. You could go into Africa, places like Kenya, South America, Guatemala, so Central America, I should say Guatemala. So places like that we're actually working. And then countries like Australia, where we're raising money to invest in that change that we're trying to deliver, but also advocating for change. Part of how we go about doing our work is to say countries like Australia, because of our reputation and the voice we have in our region, it's really important that our government acts to help bring about the change we're trying to deliver on.
Yeah, okay, so the Australian arm of the organisation, how many countries in the Asia-Pacific region have you been asked to assist with?
Yeah, so we particularly work with the Philippines. We've been working with them for quite some years now. So in Australia, IJM's been here for 10 years this year, actually. And so a lot of our work over, say, the last 5-6 years has been with the Philippines and working on this sexual exploitation of children problem.
Yeah, okay. And so let's talk about the challenges really in the world today, because it's said that there's more people trapped in slavery today in 2024 than ever before in human history. Over 50 million children, which is almost twice the population of Australia, and that includes some women and men as well, beaten, raped and starved in an industry worth over $150 billion globally. Talk to me about that challenge, David.
Yeah, it feels enormous, but that's where what we've done is try to break that down and say you can't just deal with that sort of huge scale of the harm that's going on and the number of people. So we've chosen 55 locations that we're actually going to work in. So that could be a city or a state or a country, and said there's particular harm that we want to fix there. So it might be forced labour, which is the classic sort of thing that we think about as modern slavery. So the bonded labour, people who are being forced to, in a coercive environment, to do things that they just don't want to do, with underpaid and no ability to get out of that situation. The work also involves trafficking of people and solving that sort of problem. So unfortunately, that goes on again in our region. And then the sexual exploitation of children, violence against women and children is another form of the harm that's happening that we're looking to address.
Yeah, massive. And so I guess I want to ask you as an individual, like, what's your background and why did you decide to get involved in IJM?
Yeah, so my background's 30 years in financial services, actually, but I've had a lot of extracurricular community engagement outside of that time. IJM has 3 principles. So we're professional, we're bridge builders, and we're Christian. So the staff are all Christian. Obviously, the work we do is in many different countries. So we don't pick and choose based on people's religion on who we help. We'll help everyone because that's what we're called to do. And I was drawn into this just to say there's a horrific social evil. You've just listed some of the stats that needs to get dealt with. And that harm on real people is abhorrent. We're all people created in God's image. We all have dignity and worth. And so working to fix this, and as I said before, the model that IJM has developed has that ability to change lives and have real impact. So we do that work on those individual cases, but looking to actually put in place systemic coverage that's going to create a good justice outcome for millions of people. And in those 9 locations we've worked in, we think there are now 10 million people who have actually been protected from harm in those locations.
That's amazing. 10 million people. Again, that's almost half the population of Australia. And just from my external observation, it seems like a lot of Christians are really helping out in this space, fighting modern slavery. As you probably know, it was William Wilberforce in the British Empire who abolished slavery in the British Empire and really set the standard, set the bar high for every other European power and North America to abolish slavery eventually. And he was a very committed Christian, and it just seems like a lot of Christians are the ones providing answers in this modern-day form of slavery as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation of how God is acting in our world to say through his people he can bring about this amazing change to bring about good for people who are currently being harmed. Our founder is an American guy, Gary Haugen. He was actually the UN Special Prosecutor in Rwanda for the genocide there in the mid-90s. And that drove him into saying, we've got to fix something here and do this work to, we need to keep doing the aid work that we've all been doing so much of, but at the same time, the people that we're trying to help need a justice system, that confidence that the police, the law enforcement, the courts are actually going to treat them properly when they have matters that need to be dealt with. So we actually need to do both and get that done in the world.
And how important, David, is your personal Christian faith as far as a motivator for what you're doing in IGM as well?
Yeah, I think it's critical to what we bring into this every day to say we're here as part of God's people, bringing about his good in the world. And so the fact that the team do all have a shared, united faith creates a really good unity of purpose and understanding so we can work this together. It gives us that opportunity to share the weight of the work and realise that we don't have to hold all this ourselves as part of God's agent for change. We can bring about that work in the world.
Yeah. If you just joined us, this is David Braga. He is the CEO of International Justice Mission. It's a worldwide organisation committed to the abolishing of slavery and sex trafficking. And in Australia, they've just launched an advocacy. I can't say that word, David, I'm sorry. A campaign to advocate for the victims of exploitation. I'm never going to say that word today. And we're going to talk more about that. We're going to take a short break, and we are back very shortly with David Braga, the CEO of the International Justice Mission.
There are many ways people listen to Vision, including in cars through the Vision app.
The Vision app is compatible with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. So if you have mobile coverage, you can stream any of Vision's live radio channels in crystal clear quality and enjoy a growing range of on-demand podcasts all on the go. There are other ways to connect your phone to your vehicle speakers too. You can see detailed instructions when you Google ways to listen to Vision.
However and wherever you listen to Vision, you can be sure that the announcers, programs and music will help you look to God daily.
I accepted Jesus as my saviour. My parents don't know God and don't like me tuning into your broadcasts.
The power of radio can lead millions to Jesus. Through media, station sponsor FEBC broadcasts the gospel to the poor and persecuted in the most remote countries on earth.
Your messages give me hope and peace.
The gift of radio will change lives forever. Visit febc.org.au.
A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
And welcome back to 2020. This is Andrew McLennan. We have a very special guest with us today, and his name is David Braga, and he's the CEO of the International Justice Mission, and they are committed to abolishing modern-day slavery and the sexual exploitation of children, women, and even men all across the world. And David, I want to just ask you a question. You've been in this role a couple of years. What's one of the worst stories you've heard, but also that story ends with a positive outcome thanks to the work of IGM in the life of an individual somewhere in the world?
Yeah, so if I share with you, we said before we're talking about sexual exploitation of children, and so this is a difficult topic to talk about. So if that's hard for you, you may want to be careful in listening to this. But one of the people who really impacted me was a young girl in the Philippines who at the age of 8 was coerced by her aunt into performing sex acts with her cousin online for perpetrators overseas to be able to watch. So she was doing this for candy because her aunt was a fun person and was enticing them in to do this together. It's just shocking to think of and really uncomfortable. But she trusted her aunt. This is her aunt. And so, and at that age, she didn't really understand what was going on. So fortunately, she was rescued at the age of 11. The family moved, and that broke that cycle of crime, and she was able to be brought out. And so IJM then worked with her to give her the psychological support, the aftercare, to be able to help her to process and understand what had happened to her. She's now 21-year-old who's able to look back on that now and process it, but be able to become an active member of society. She's wanting to become a teacher, and IJM hosts a Philippine survivor network with more than 100 people like her who have worked this through and are now using their voice to advocate for the change that we need to bring about, both in a legal sense, but also in a change sense for all of us to contribute to the work.
Well, can I ask, let's just stop there. Like, how does this little 8-year-old girl get rescued? Like, who cried out for help? How did she get someone, contacting you guys to come in and rescue her?
Yeah, so in her situation, she had someone else see what was then going on with that change, and they contacted the investigators who were able to bring in the law enforcement. So in that environment, we work with law enforcement to do all of this. We never act by ourselves. It's always done alongside the Philippine law enforcement community to bring them in. Yeah.
And holistically, like across the world, do you find that the majority of law enforcement, even in countries that could be described as third world, are really passionate about getting rid of, the exploitation of children?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot of really good people who want to make a big change on this. I met personally with the Thailand director of special investigations looking at forced trafficking, and he's a really impressive man. He takes this personally. He's committed to it. He wants to bring about this change. So there are significant people in law enforcement in these countries that just say this has to stop. We've got to bring it to an end.
Yeah, I've met a few Filipino police officers. Actually, one of the regional directors came out to watch Manny Pacquiao fight in Brisbane a couple of years ago, and I was hosting him a little bit, driving around Brisbane, and he was hardcore. He was like Rambo. He was just telling me how they take down criminals, and very committed to his job, very loyal to his people. So, yeah, I'm sure it's not hard for you guys to link up with good people on the ground in law enforcement. But if you've just joined us, this is David Braga. He's the CEO of the International Justice Mission. We're talking about abolishing modern-day slavery and the exploitation of children and women and men. But David, tell us what the Tougher on Tech campaign is all about.
Yeah, so IJM is calling on the Australian government to protect children from online sexual exploitation by Australian offenders. Australia has a world-class legal system for online safety, which starts with our Online Safety Act and the E-Safety Commissioner. And that Online Safety Act is Australia's legal framework that promotes a safer digital environment and seeks to prevent online harms. And that act is under review right now. So we're calling on the federal government to strengthen it in ways that will protect children from sexual exploitation.
Okay, would you say now that the laws are inadequate then? Do they need tightening because they're not working?
I'm not sure I'd say they're inadequate as much as we think they can be better. Like, they can be better. Like, it goes back to, we already have a world-class system. What we've got is amongst the best on the planet, but there's still places that it could go, because there are still children today who have been sexually abused online and just using the same core mainstream technology platforms that many of us use for normal purposes every day. The online offenders who perpetrate this crime are paying for and directing abuse via live stream video, and it's often facilitated by the child's immediate family. I've just got to say the statistics are uncomfortable. We completed a study in last year that showed that almost 500,000 or 1 in 100 children in the Philippines are being sold this way, and that harm is heartbreaking, and it's just hard to get your head around it, and yet it's sadly what we found. And we just need to confront this in Australia because, again, another data point that's uncomfortable but we got to deal with is that the Philippines Anti-Money Laundering Council has shown that Australians are the third largest consumer of this material from the Philippines. In between 2020 and 2022, just from the data they could identify, they found that Australians had paid $1.2 million across 9,000 transactions for this sort of material. So the Philippines has become an epicenter for it, but it's an increasing crime type across the world. We've seen it in other countries like Thailand and Colombia, and unfortunately there's even reports of it in Australia. So there's a moral imperative to just bring this to an end and do something more about it.
So is part of your lobbying of the Australian government that you want tougher penalties for Australian perpetrators as well?
Yeah, it is. So where we want tougher penalties is actually on the technology companies. So the reality is this is a crime where if there was no demand, there'd be no supply. So while we are a contributor to the problem, we can also fix it using that legal framework we've got. The Online Safety Act gives us another way to put pressure on the technology companies to prevent the illegal content on their platform.
Yeah, look, I want to read another success story. On your website, it says it takes a village to rescue a village. It's a great concept. And it says Malaya's entire village was trapped in bonded labour until IGM investigated and restored their lives. Together we can restore even more people. How does a whole village get trapped in bonded labour? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so unfortunately the way that works is bonded labour often starts with somebody who's got a pressure point that needs them to have extra money. So it could be a sickness in the family, it could be a death, frankly, in the family, and so there's a funeral that they need to pay for, and so the family just doesn't have the money to do that, and so they go to essentially a loan shark who lends them the money but then forces them, traffics them into a work environment against their will where they can't go work somewhere else to say, you're going to have to get this done. And so if you just scale that problem, up and across, you can end up in these just obtuse situations where there's a whole village that's been trapped by this. As people look to try and help each other out, they just get caught in the net.
Yeah, I saw this in Congo. I was in Congo for a couple of weeks a few years ago, and I heard the same sort of stories. Whole villages were basically held to ransom that they all had to mine. There's certain metals in Congo which go into mobile phones. And, I heard about a village that was literally held at gunpoint. And if they didn't mine, then, horrible sexual things were happening to the villagers and worse. And they were just trapped in that very same situation. And sadly, in their situation, I didn't hear a positive ending. I didn't hear about a positive outcome. They even went to the United Nations for help and they said, we can't help you. And, so this is a real worldwide problem, isn't it? This modern day bonded labour.
Yeah, it's unfortunately still really prevalent. We have had some good success with it in places like in southern India. We've done work on bonded labour, and so just that incremental change that I was talking about a little earlier on the program for listeners who are listening then, looking at individual cases and saying, how can we fix that and getting that put in place. The state of Tamil Nadu is one of our success stories where we've got that down by over 80%. So it is something we can solve. You just got to keep chipping away at it.
Yeah, amazing. Well, tell us about this new advocacy campaign that began on Monday. How can the average person and how can some of our listeners get involved in this campaign?
Yeah, so we've got these three changes that we're going to ask for in the Online Safety Act. So one of them is to expand the safety requirements. So we think the operating systems of the technology we use, so, if you look at the operating system, that's Apple, Android and Windows, can be can be improved so that then if they detect child abuse material, they switch off the cameras on those devices and stop the ability to produce the material in the first place, or at least block the material from being transmitted so it can't be spread any further. And if you think about it, doing that change at that level then blocks apps because the apps can't work anymore. And so that's what we're looking for there. We also want the technology companies to have a legal duty of care to prevent online harm from occurring through the use of their products and services. We think the onus should be on them to make sure that their technical design, their business model, their algorithms do not facilitate online sexual exploitation of children, and that their products can't be misused to create, distribute, or consume this material. And we want them to be held responsible that if a child is harmed through their service, whether as a user or through somebody else's use, that they're held accountable for that. And that accountability then leads to the third leg, which is to increase the fines. None of this works without a deterrent. So we think in terms of strengthening the Online Safety Act, the E-Safety Commissioner should have the power to issue fines, and we would suggest that we mirror that to what's just been done in the UK, where the maximum fine now is 10% of global turnover, or $35 million. So today the fines are down at $782,500, which particularly for the largest companies is going to be less than the cost of putting out the new safety measures. So they're the three things we're after. And what we love is for people who want to help us bring this to an end to join us in going to our federal members of parliament and saying, let's make it unacceptable to have technology that fails to protect vulnerable children from sexual exploitation. We've got some guidance material on our website. So we're International Justice Mission. So our website is www.ijm.org.au. There's a banner at the top of that page. If you click on the banner, there's a button there to email your MP or call your MP. And if you follow the prompts, we've got some suggested language. You can add your name and contact details and press send, or look up the phone number for your MP. That we've got talking points there you can use as a guide. But we would love it for people to join us in helping make these changes to the Australian Online Safety Act to protect children, both in Australia and around the world.
Yeah, so if people go to your website, which is ijm.org.au, that's ijm.org.au. There's prompts on there, and there's some helpful material so we can all get involved in this together. But let's talk, David, about churches. How do churches get involved? Because this really interests me in the work of IJM.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of really amazing church partners that get involved. We have a opportunity for churches to learn about our work. We call it a Freedom Sunday. So for churches to host a Freedom Sunday, we can have an IJM speaker come and join you on that day to describe God's heart for justice and how, as his people, we can be stepping into that work and doing it together. And so to partner with those churches then in saying, what does that look and feel like to be God's hands and feet of justice in the world? So if people would like to make contact about that, you can do that through the website as well. But we see church partnership as a really critical way to have people join this work.
Yeah, and one of your catch cries is, we are on a mission to partner with local communities to build a more just world where everyone can expect to be safe and protected. So when you're on the ground in countries like the Philippines, do you get a big uptake from churches there as well in the programs that you initiate?
Yeah, definitely. We absolutely do. So that partnership isn't just here in Australia. It is, as you say, globally and in the countries we work in. The church in the Philippines is amazing. Their support for initiatives such as our aftercare, as well as our survivor network, which I guess is part of the aftercare, has just been incredible. And so we can't do this without the partnership of the worldwide church.
Yeah, absolutely. And David, just tell us something else. Like it says, over 85,000 people have been brought to safety from slavery and violence. Like that is a lot of people. Over what time frame is that?
So I think that's measuring back to when IJM started doing its work in the early 2000s. And I find it hard to imagine that number. So I sat down to say, what's that number actually like? And it's actually like if you flew a plane load of people from Sydney to Melbourne every day, there and back, every day of the year, that's when you get to that sort of number of people. So we've brought about a lot of good. I also just want to say the work we do starts with those individuals and each person's case, but back to the way we want to do our work is fixing whatever their problem was for everybody. And so what we're really proud of are then the 10 million people that we've actually been able to protect from harm in the jurisdictions that we've already done the work. And our goal is actually to protect 500 million people from particular harm types in identified locations around the world where we're working right now.
That's massive. That's a massive number. It's a big goal. Do you think you guys will reach it?
If I was going to say, it's a question of when the resources become available, we can do it. What we've proven is that we're capable of actually driving those positive outcomes. So that methodology of having other people outside come in, normally universities, come in to do measures, proves that it works. And so we know that it's achievable to get the work done. It's actually just a question of time and money to say, let's get boots on the ground and put the changes in place.
So really the greatest need of IGM is finances. The more money that you guys are able to get your hands on through donation or different initiatives, the more work you can do. Is that really your greatest need right now? More resources?
Look, that is true, and I don't want to dissuade away from the advocacy work as well. Both matter. So the physical resource that funding pays for brings about a lot of change on the ground. At the same time, using changes like I talked about, if we had the technology platforms change, that could switch this harm off like really quickly as well. So we actually don't mind how the harm stops. We just want it to stop. And so if we can find clever ways to intervene that will also bring this to an end, we're also working to that goal as well. It's not only about sort of the on the ground work, it's also bringing about that big structural change.
Yeah, well, we've got a question from a listener actually who's just texted us that says, if internet providers will be able to restrict child porn, would that same process have the potential to restrict Christian material by an authoritarian government? So it's a question about freedom of speech. If we restrict child porn, does that also restrict the Christian church from communicating their message?
Yeah, so I guess at its heart, we don't think that the type of change we're talking about is actually to block other activity or privacy or messaging. What we're advocating for is the tools to switch off the cameras when things shouldn't be viewed. Now, that's a very particular and different problem to the one that the listener has identified. So I would hope that we could corral the change we're asking for and not have it fire off and block other things that we actually do want to bring about.
Yeah, so one of the biggest needs you guys want to address is just the fact that these live streaming platforms can live stream things which are just we don't even want to talk about and don't want to mention.
Yep.
Do you think that's possible? Can that be done?
Yeah, we do. So we're aware of at least 6 different technologies that have been created that actually would do this, that do switch off the cameras, that do block material from being produced. So there's a lot of technology that identifies material after it's been produced, but what we're trying to block is it from being created in the first place. So we know that there's technologies, using artificial intelligence capability, of course, that are doing this now. So why don't we just scale that and make it mandatory?
Yeah, okay, so there's the live streaming. Is there any other aspect to some of these big tech companies that you think could and should be changed really quickly?
Well, if I go back to that idea of making them think about this and say, how could our service be used for harm? You know, we've seen this before where they kind of go, oh, we just didn't think about that. We didn't realise that's what might happen. We think that's where putting a positive obligation on them to actually turn their mind to it and say, no, we've thought about this through a harm lens and harm to vulnerable children, and we've consciously looked to put safety by design into place. That's got to be worth asking them to do. And in fact, don't just ask, we need to oblige them to do that.
Yeah, well, being Washington-based, obviously most of the big tech is based in the Silicon Valley in the US. Are they getting much of a response? I'm sure that through Washington they're lobbying the big tech companies and trying to get these changes. What's the response been like?
Yeah, so I think big tech is increasingly more aware of the pressure that we're bringing to bear. But again, that's why even in countries like Australia, and I mentioned before the UK, what they've changed, the more countries like Australia that actually bring about changes to our law, that sends a big message to them about their social license to operate, and that it's no longer acceptable. Like the free form that we've allowed for 20, 25 years, is coming to an end. As a society, we want these controls and protections in place, and they actually have to take this seriously and put it into place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, David, it is a massive task, and I guess at the heart of this too is this human corruption, the fact that there are individuals in the world who gain a sick pleasure out of the exploitation of children and women and even men sometimes, and you guys are really up against it. And I guess Wilberforce was the same, wasn't he? I think he spent his whole life fighting slavery, and how many times he went in front of the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and how many times he was ridiculed and mocked. I mean, you probably know the story better than anyone, but I think a lot of the people in the House of Lords in particular were landowners in the West Indies and in North and South America who used slave labour, and there was no way in the world they wanted to change the laws about slavery because they were making money from it. And yet he persevered with his faith, didn't he? He persevered with his tenacity and his prayers. And I think it was towards the end of his life that finally slavery was abolished in the British Empire. Do you ever feel the same way, that you guys are just facing a massive uphill battle?
I guess at times it may feel that way, but we've got that cloud of witnesses, right, to draw on and say, we've been here before, we can do it again. We've got that evidence where we've already got change that we've been able to bring about. We've got millions of people who are protected today because of the work we've already done. So this is possible to achieve. Inside we have a phrase about being unafraid and just saying, we've got to be unafraid in what we do, because there are there are people who don't want to see this happen, and so we've got to be willing to stand up and take a stand and say, this needs to change. We can't continue the way we are. And so right now, that's why we're asking for support in changing our Online Safety Act to say, let's put a change in place now in Australia that will send a message to the technology companies to say, we don't want your technology to be continued to be used in this way. It's unacceptable to us as Australia that children are harmed by your technology.
So I guess you just got to believe that the light will dispel the darkness, hey? And as the Bible says, God is light, and you're working for him and with him and through him. And I guess it's just that faith that keeps you guys going, huh?
Yep, that's well said. Like we're here to bring about his change in the world, and every day we get a step closer.
So, David, just before we round up today, have you got any final thoughts for our listeners, or just the last thing you want to share today?
Look, probably just that last thing to say. This is meaningful change. Our members of Parliament, I was in Canberra a couple of weeks ago, they do listen to us. They respect our voice as their constituents. And so if you are willing to go have a look at the website, ijm.org.au, and help us by emailing your MP or calling your MP, they will listen to that. It does make a difference, and we can bring about this change in the world.
Well, David Braga, CEO of IJM Australia, which is the International Justice Mission. Really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I do wish you all the best with this campaign that you launched on Monday, and encourage our listeners, if you were really touched by this conversation today or just the challenges that they're facing and that they're fighting on behalf of all of us, go to their website. That's ijm.org.au. That's ijm.org.au and join this campaign to toughen up the laws in Australia to prevent the exploitation of minors online. But David Braga, CEO of IGM Australia, I want to thank you so much for joining us on 2020 Today.
Thanks so much, and I really appreciate you having me on, and all the best and God bless.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.